Hey guys, welcome back to Recreational Sniper. Tonight, the sun's going down, but I'm going to try to get through this video pretty quick. We're going to talk about the 5.56 or also the 223, and we're going to talk about a little bit about this rifle setup, and we're going to talk about some projectile setups, different kinds of bullets and purposes, and really give you some insight into how far you can actually shoot this cartridge accurately, how far it can be used lethally, how far its effective range will be, and depending on the type of target that you're trying to hit, whether it's just a steel target or whether it's game, small game, large game, varmint, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about a few different kinds of bullets. We're going to talk about the ones that I really like to use, and then we're going to talk about the other common rounds found, and then we're going to talk about some military rounds that are commonly used, military and law enforcement rounds that are commonly used. So let's get into this. First of all, this is a Ruger American Ranch 5.56. All right, so it's got a 16.5-inch barrel, standard Ruger trigger setup, standard Ruger stock. Everything is factory there. The one thing that I've done modified to this is I added, swapped the rail out on top. I swapped it to a 20-minute of angle rail. Added a Caldwell XLA bipod to it, and this is the, I believe, 6 to 9 inch version. And then I added an Ultradyne Apollo Max muzzle brake, and we've got an Arkin SH4 Gen 2 6 to 24 power scope. Okay, so in its current configuration, with the scope having 108.8 minutes of angle combined with the 20 MOA rail, will give me a usable effective adjustment range in the scope of 74.4 minutes of angle. So it will get really far out there. I've got total over 74 minutes of angle to play with. So I brought my toolkit out here but I also have a 20 MOA scope base, a single piece scope base, which I'm going to swap out in exchange for these two scope rings. I'm going to put the 20 MOA base on there, which will give me 94.4 minutes of usable adjustment range, because it's going to be 20 MOA scope mount with a 20 MOA base. So 40 minutes of angle before I even start dialing on the scope. And if you know how scopes work, it may have a full adjustment range of 108.8 minutes of angle is what the full adjustment range is. You got to divide that in half, and we get 54.4 minutes of angle. We can add the 20 MOA base to that. We get 74.4, and then add the 20 MOA mount to that, and we'll get 94.4 minutes of angle. So we can actually turn this short little compact, Ruger ranch rifle that would otherwise be used for just close range stuff. We can actually get this thing to stretch pretty far out there. Now, trying to stretch it out really far, you're going to have to take some serious ballistics into consideration. You're going to have to take some different projectile types and shapes into consideration. Let's start with the ones that I really like to use, my personal favorites. I don't have any out here in front of me, but I really like the Hornady 50 grain VMAX, and it has, now for long range purposes, it's not very good. It's got a pretty poor ballistic coefficient. It's 0.242 on the G1, and the sectional density is really low. But the way the bullet is designed, really close range, taking out game type of deal, it's extremely effective. It creates a huge hydrostatic wound Huge amount of hydrostatic shock at close range. So the maximum supersonic range of this bullet from a 16-inch barrel, this is all data from, my rifle, my 16-inch barrel. This is all my load data here. I can run this bullet at about 3,200 feet per second. So my max supersonic range is, give or take, 760 yards. For taking medium-sized game, I would say like deer-sized or under, up to 150 pounds, give or take, in my area. That's about the biggest deer you're probably going to see. I like to have at least 500 foot-pounds of energy, about 357 Magnum power, 10 millimeter power, that sort of thing. So this rifle with that bullet combination, the 50 grain VMAX, will get me 500 foot-pounds of energy all the way out to 310 yards. Now, I don't really, just for hunting purposes, I don't hunt that far out. All of the game, all of the deer that I've shot have all been within 50 yards, 50 yards or less. And with this particular bullet, it will produce over 1,000 foot-pounds of energy out to 50 yards. Past 50 yards, it starts really dropping off, but it will carry up to 500 foot-pounds out to 310 yards, which 500 foot-pounds for me is the bare minimum that I want for taking deer-sized game. So 500 foot-pounds out to 310 yards. Next, we can look at 62 grain rebated boat tail ULD bullet from Alco. That's this guy right here. Now, going to that bullet, that particular bullet, these are aluminum tipped. They've got a lead core and a really nice, pretty heavy jacket to them. So they have a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.450, which is pretty high. That is a pretty high ballistic coefficient for a 62 grain bullet. The supersonic range on this one goes all the way up to 1,310 yards. Okay. And it will carry over 500 foot-pounds of energy to 620 yards and 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to 160 yards. So it will basically triple your 1,000 foot-pound range, and it will basically double your 500 foot-pound range over the 50 grain VMAX. If that's what you want to hunt with, you could potentially take a deer-sized animal out to 620 yards with that particular bullet. And that is running at 3,000 feet per second at the muzzle. Going on from there, we go to the 77 grain rebated boat tail ULD bullet from Alco. And running the 77 grain, we're looking about 2,800 feet per second at the muzzle. And this is from my experience, my load data. It has a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.512, so a little better than the 62 grain, though it is exactly the same bullet. The bullet design is just a little longer, a little more weight to it. The supersonic range on it, running at 2,800 out of my rifle, will get me to 1,370 yards. So a little further than the 62 grain. And it will carry 500 foot-pounds out to 750 yards. So about 130 yards further than the 62 grain. And then it will carry 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to 240 yards, which is about 80 yards further than the 62 grain Alco. So really good bullet, and it's starting to get up there in sectional density, which means it's going to have better penetration purposes, which is what you want in a medium to large game bullet. You want a higher sectional density for better penetration. And then from there, we go to the Burger 80.5 grain full bore hollow point boat tail. And This bullet happens to be my personal favorite, and it comes down to a few factors that I haven't mentioned yet, but we're gonna just kind of keep on track with the way we're comparing these. It has a G1 ballistic coefficient of 0.454, so not as good as the 77 grain Alco. It does have a little better sectional density at 0.229 over the 77 grain, which is 0.219. This bullet will give me a supersonic range of 1,160 yards, and it will give me 500 foot-pounds to 630 yards and 1,000 foot-pounds to 190 yards. So because of its lower ballistic coefficient, it actually slows down quicker and loses a little more momentum, a little more energy quicker than the 77 grain does. And we're running this 80.5 grain at 2,700 feet per second, so about 100 feet per second less. And that's just because that's where it's really accurate at. Okay, and then from there, the next three bullets I have on here are actually military and law enforcement bullets. These are military and law enforcement loadings. We have a 62 grain M855 or SS109 projectile, and that is from Hornady. This particular one's from Hornady. G1 ballistic coefficient is pretty low, not as low as the 50 grain VMAX, but it's pretty low. It's 0.274. Sectional density is 0.177. Now, it's important to note that because this projectile has a steel penetrator in its core, or part of its core, the sectional density, even though it's lower, this is actually going to have a component to it that's going to penetrate better. It's going to out penetrate some of these other bullets that have higher sectional densities. So with this, it will give us an effective, out of my rifle again, running 3,000 feet per second. These commonly will run in 20-inch barrels plus. They will run over 3,100, but in this one particularly will get me about 3,000 feet per second. Give me a supersonic range of 800 yards. It'll carry 500 foot-pounds of energy to 380 yards, and it will carry 1,000 foot-pounds of energy to 90 yards, so up to 90 yards away. Moving on from that, we can look at the Hornady 55 grain FMJ. It's commonly used in a lot of military loadings, a lot of bulk ammo, the just standard 55 grain 5.56 ammo or 55 grain 223 ammo. Will typically run out of a 16-inch barrel, will typically run about 3,100 feet per second. Give us a max supersonic range of 740 yards, 500 foot-pounds to 320 yards, and 1,000 foot-pounds to 60 yards. And the G1 ballistic coefficient on this is 0.243, which is right just a hair above the 50 grain VMAX. The sectional density is 0.157, so at really close range, even though it's an FMJ, they do have a fairly soft core. It will more than likely completely shred on impact at really close range. We're talking less than 60 yards. But when you're out there, 100 plus yards, 200 yards or so, you're not going to have that. You're going to have really good penetration on that round, even though it's got low sectional density. It's because it's got a pretty thick jacket, and it's just the way FMJs work. Moving on from that, we're going to talk about the 77 grain OTM. Now, a lot of law enforcement use these bullets for their tactical use, and they use them in ARs, and they use them also in bolt action rifles. They've got a pretty decent G1 ballistic coefficient of 372 and a sectional density of 219. These are 0.372 and 0.219, 0.219, that sort of thing. It will give us a supersonic range out of this rifle up to 1,000 yards. And it will give us 500 foot-pounds up to 540 yards, and 1,000 foot-pounds up to 170 yards. Alright, so if you're taking notes and kind of going along, you can go ahead and like stop and go back to sections and kind of look at this. Now there's a ton of other 224 class bullets. I mean, we've got bullets ranging from like 27 or 25 grains and then going all the way up to 90 grains. But because this rifle and the barrel twist that it has, I choose to stick with these bullets particularly. And my personal favorite one, and I will explain this, is the Berger 80.5 grain bullet. Out of all the testing I've done, load development I've done shooting it, I've achieved the best, tightest groups with it, and that's more important to me than raw power. So the Berger is my favorite, personal favorite. I do shoot the Alcos. Clearly I've got those. I've got the Bergers. I've got the 77 grain Alco and the 62 grain Alco, and I've got the Berger 80.5 grain. But the Bergers to me just gave me a little bit tighter group consistency from one range day to the next. It just consistently performed a little bit better, and that's the reason why I chose it. And one of the other things considering too is when it comes to hunting, for me, hunting animals, all the deer that I have shot with a 223, and the ammunition that I used mostly was the 45 grain Winchester ballistic silver tips, and those are running about 3,300, 3,400 feet per second from a 16-inch bull barrel single shot target rifle. And I've never had any issues with deer running off even using a bullet that light. But it's also important to note that when I was using that bullet, my furthest shot was it was inside 50 yards. I want to say it was probably closer to 30 yards. So at 30 yards, that bullet has an immense amount of energy and an immense amount of hydrostatic shock. And even though the sectional density is pretty poor and it has very low penetration depth, it still causes enough damage because of the speed it's going, the amount of energy transfer it's giving, that it will effectively kill an animal. Now, further away from that, I wouldn't probably be, past 100 yards, I wouldn't be super comfortable with it, even though, out to 500 yards, you probably, or not 500, but out to 300 yards, you probably still have enough energy, effective energy, to take a deer. I still wouldn't be comfortable with it. Now, when you're talking about other types of targets, this is where your sectional density starts to come into play. And when you're looking for a bullet that will penetrate better at a further range, you're probably going to want the higher sectional density that you can get, the highest you can get. And that comes in with the Berger 80.5 grain at .229. That's a pretty respectful sectional density. If you want to penetrate a car door, it will do that pretty effectively. These other bullets that are under .2, like the Hornady 62 grain M855, it's kind of a weird one because it does have that steel penetrator core. You're probably going to go ahead and it's probably going to penetrate well for you. But your Hornady 55 grain FMJ and your Alco 62 grain bullet and your Hornady 50 grain VMAX, the sectional density on those is pretty low. They are more than likely going to disintegrate or dump all their energy very, very quickly within just a few layers of whatever target you're trying to hit. So If you're trying to get deeper penetration through harder material, harder mediums, you want to aim for a higher sectional density usually, unless it has a characteristic of a penetrator core like I mentioned with the 62 grain M855. So that's just some of the stuff I wanted to go over tonight and give you guys something to think about. One other thing I want to hit on before we leave is the cost of these projectiles, and we're going to go ahead and look at these real quick. That Hornady 50 grain VMAX, you can typically pick those up for about 27 cents each, or about $27 per 100. The Alcos, both the 62 grain and the 77 grain, you're going to pay about 90 cents each, or $90 per 100 on those. The Burger 80.5 grain, you're going to pay about 45 cents each, or 45 bucks per 100. The Hornady 62 grain M855, because they're so mass produced, this is one of those you're going to get really cheap. You can get it for about 19 cents a piece, or $19 per 100. And the Hornady 55 grain FMJ, you're going to get really cheap as well, because they're so mass produced and so like mass used around the world for training purposes and whatnot. You're going to get those for about 11 cents a piece. So dirt cheap, 11 cents a piece, so about 11 bucks per 100 projectiles. And I'm not talking 100 rounds, like 100 loaded rounds. This is all just projectile cost. And then on the Sierra 77 grain OTM, you're going to pick those up for around 36 cents a piece, so 36 bucks per 1,000. But they're really nice bullets, what can I say? So, but for me personally, the Burger is a really nice happy medium for me. It's really consistent, produces the best groups out of my rifle. The Burger for me is the way to go in this particular setup. Now, in a different gun, it may be different. One of these other bullets may just shoot better consistently more often, and it may be the favorite, or may become the favorite in a different rifle system and setup. So that's a lot to consider. And I know I've been kind of talking about this for quite a bit, but I just wanted to give you guys something to think about, and I hope you guys stick with me next time in the next video. With that being said, please like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching. Recreational Sniper out.